Owen's here. It's positive at the moment. Anyway, a good start to the week on the Asian markets. Investors there seem to be out of step, though, with the negative noises. Had to be some negativity in there, didn't there, coming out of Greece?
Yeah, we'll get more on that in just a moment, Stuart. But the Nikkei managed to escape all of that negative sentiment, it seems, closing the day's trade just over 1% up. A little bit more choppy, though, in Hong Kong on the Hang Seng, and indeed on the Shanghai Composite. You can see there just in the last half an hour or so in the afternoon trading session, dipping into the red. So perhaps some of those concerns from Europe are starting to seep in a little bit. The Kospi, though, has managed to find its feet a little bit this Monday morning. You can see there just marginally up.
So another weekend then of deadlock talks in Athens, finishing with exasperation in Brussels. The EU has given Greece a fresh ultimatum: agree on vital structural reforms or risk losing that second bailout. It's double trouble for the coalition, which is now battling two fronts against the unions and private investors. Yuka Royer explains.
Greece is in its 11th hour, yet it still hasn't agreed a way out of the crisis. Sunday's meeting between Prime Minister Lucas Papademos and his coalition partners bore no fruit. Despite pressure from international lenders, some refused to accept further wage and spending cuts.
I will not contribute to the breakout of a revolution by the new poor that will then engulf the whole of Europe.
At stake is a second bailout package worth €130 billion, funded by the EU, the IMF and the European Central Bank. Greece desperately needs the money in order to avoid defaulting on its debt repayment on March 20th, but it's been pending since October. The so-called Troika, the international creditors, demand Greece impose more austerity measures that would include job and wage cuts. The head of the Eurogroup, Jean-Claude Juncker, had given a stern warning ahead of the meeting.
If we were to see that everything was failing in Greece, then there wouldn't be a new programme. That would mean a default in March.
On the sideline of Sunday's meeting, Prime Minister Papademos and his finance minister also met representatives of major banks that own Greek debt. As part of the European rescue deal, Athens also needs to clinch a deal with private creditors to swap Greek bonds into securities, effectively writing off €100 billion in debt. The Prime Minister said political leaders have agreed to cut this year's spending by 1.5% of GDP, though details weren't forthcoming. Talks are to continue Monday.
So those talks due to resume a little later this Monday, according to Wire reports. Let's get some more on the Greek situation from our correspondent in Athens, Natalie Savarakas, who joins us on the line. Natalie, good morning to you. Very complex situation. We seem to get lots of deadlines. Can you give us an idea of what happens next if the worst does come to pass?
Well, Greece is very much on the brink of a disorderly bankruptcy. Now, if the party leaders backing Greece's unity government are unable to reach an agreement with the country's creditors, then the debt-strapped country will be unable to tap into the new €130 billion bailout deal, which is absolutely vital for Athens to avoid a full-blown default next month, as it cannot cover the bond repayment due on March 20th, and that equates to some €14.5 billion. But what is equally important is that what is tied to the second loan is a plan by private financial institutions to write down €100 billion of Greek debt. That's at least a 50% haircut. Now, the three Greek party leaders and the prime ministers will resume their talks in just a few hours in a last-ditch effort again to clinch this deal. Unions, meanwhile, are organizing protests to oppose all this agreement because they say they're just simply fed up with all these new measures that are just pledging a bleak future for the country.
OK, Natalie, many thanks for that update. That was Natalie Savarakas in Athens for us.
Well, we're going to stay in the Eurozone because there are growing concerns that Portugal is also entering default territory. The country's borrowing costs have soared over the last 7 days. At one point last week, interest on 10-year government bonds hit 18%, though they have since slipped to 13.5%.
Yeah, and in Portugal's crisis, it's the small and medium-sized businesses which are taking the brunt of hardship. Latest figures show that 60% of these firms have gone bankrupt in the last 12 months alone. And with even more austerity now on the cards, small business owners can only wait and hope that their companies can weather this financial storm. Jen Carswell has more details.
no workers, and no work. Despite these fully stocked shelves, this small business owner is preparing to close his doors for good.
In the second half of 2011, in our case, the situation collapsed because the work decreased dramatically. I'd say it dropped by about 50%.
This modest construction firm is just one of too many casualties of the financial crisis. In total, 10,000 small and medium-sized businesses went bankrupt last year.
In terms of companies going bankrupt, it's the micro companies and the small and medium companies. We're witnessing a great amount of small companies going under.
These companies are the backbone of the economy, making up 99% of Portuguese businesses. And without the cash buffers of bigger companies, in tough times they feel the squeeze when the money chain breaks down.
We have this weird and terrible situation in the Portuguese economy whereby companies that have customers, orders and suppliers, stable businesses, are in danger of closing down because of how long it takes to get paid, and for them to pay their customers like they used to be able to do.
And the state is one of the worst offenders. Local authorities owe more than 900 million euros to construction companies alone. Taking upwards of 7 months to settle their bills, many businesses may not make it to payday.
OK, let's pick up on a few more of the day's business headlines for you now. Facebook is to begin putting adverts on its mobile applications to drive up revenues during its flotation period. That's according to sources quoted by the Financial Times. It's understood the company will allow what it calls featured stories in users' news feeds ahead of its listing in the spring. Founder Mark Zuckerberg acknowledged in his filing for the flotation that there was currently a lack of meaningful revenue, in his words, from Facebook on mobile devices, which are used by around half of Facebook's 850 million members.
Michael Woodford, the former Olympus chief executive turned whistleblower, says that more revelations over the false accounting scandal are imminent. Woodford spoke out after the Japanese camera maker announced an extraordinary general meeting for 20th of April. He was forced out after going public with details of a $2 billion losses cover-up that led to much of the board resigning and the decimation of its share price.
And China's government has banned its own airlines from paying the EU's new carbon emissions charge. The country's Civil Aviation Administration says a new law charging for aircraft emissions on flights in and out of the EU contravenes the UN's climate change principles. China says its ban applies to freight as well as passenger aircraft. Just while we're talking airlines as well, just worth noting Boeing carrying out safety inspections on its fleet of Dreamliners, the 787 that was, of course, launched last year after huge delays. Boeing says there are no safety issues. Those planes are safe to fly, and All Nippon Airways, currently the only airline commercially flying the Dreamliner, says it has no plans to ground its fleet of 5 aircraft.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Owen. That's all the business, all the news from me for now. Of course, Claire's up really shortly with the latest here on Frost Van Casteries.